who are just joining. Today we are showcasing ITDP's SCOPE tool. It is a BRT Climate Impact Calculator, standing for Simple Calculator of Project Effects. And as you know, ITDP has been putting a lot of attention on buses this year. In fact, we have been really busy creating different products and messages for audience around buses, starting with the release of the BRT Standard that evaluates the BRT corridors, and it can be helpful in planning and evaluation phases of BRT. The SCOPE tool is another great instrument that can help cities make better decisions with their mobility planning and their corridors based on several criteria. And don't worry, we'll hear everything about it very shortly. The reason behind it is we know that to achieve the 1.5 Celsius global warming limit, cities need to develop efficient land use and efficient transport. And this tool helps make better decisions about design of transport corridors and make the greatest positive impact on climate. So today I am here with two colleagues from ITP Research and Impact team at Global, and we'll talk about the motivation of this work, the metrics, potential impacts, and examples. We'll also hear a voice from the development bank community and a commentary on how this tool can help not only cities, but also financing institutions. This will be followed by a brief discussion and audience Q&A. So in order of appearances, I'm just going to queue up the speakers. First, Beatriz Rodriguez, who is the Public Transport and Electrification Manager here at Global. She's spearheading a lot of ITDP's work around BRT, electrification, and funding and financing of public transport, just to name a few. Hello, Beatriz. Then we'll hear from Madeleine Lieberman, who is an associate for monitoring and evaluation, also at ITDP Global. Madeleine leads a lot of ITDP's impact evaluation work, and with her experience in data and analytics, she also led the development of the SCOPE tool. And finally, we're also welcoming Winnie Wang. She's the lead transport specialist for the infrastructure program at the World Bank Group. Winnie has diverse experience in urban transport planning and the intersection with funding and financing. So welcome you all. And while we are getting into the formal part of the webinar, I'm just going to drop a few links in the chat with the BRT Standard resources, the SCOPE tool, and others. So I will do that right now. And yeah, welcome. I'll pass it on to Beatriz.
Thank you, Ivana. Hi, everyone. Hope you are all safe and well. So my name is Beatriz Rodrigues. I'm the Public Transport and Electrification Manager at ITDP Global. And before I go ahead and explain a little bit about the BRT Simple Calculator of Project Effects, a SCOPE tool, I think we need to take a step back, actually, and understand a little bit about the context that we are living and what really motivated us to create this tool. So pollution and climate change endanger the health and life of millions of people every day. Emissions from cars, motorcycles, buses lead to increase of deaths from cardiovascular disease and respiratory problems and cancer. They also raise the average temperature in cities and cause floods, landslides, droughts, and other effects. I think, as many of you know, we are suffering from that in Brazil, actually, especially in the south zone of Brazil. So these issues are further complicated if we are talking about factors such as race, gender, age, and income. And we cannot continue the rise of emissions. So there is an urgent need to reduce them and where to start. So in cities, the main emitters of emissions are the transport sector. In particular, when we are talking about greenhouse gases, we are talking about emissions coming from cars and motorcycles. And when we are talking about local pollutants, that makes our health not so good, makes her feel sick. We are talking about the emissions coming from buses. So emissions are something that we need to take into consideration, but they are not often visible. So they are not often visible to the naked eye. So we need to make sure that we understand that, but either way, the damage that they cause is so severe, even if it takes time to manifest. Ivana, could you please? Yeah, thank you. So to recognize these damages, we need to actually quantify and acknowledge their existence. We need to acknowledge the potential impacts of each decision that we make. We need to understand what type of data that we need to collect in order for us to identify the potential impacts that is causing. And for that, we need to understand the tools that are available and the methodologies that are available, and for us to, in order for us to measure and estimate these impacts in different implementation scenarios. And throughout ITDP's history, we have developed a couple of tools and recommendations to support the use of data for monitoring and evaluation. Ivana, can you? Thank you. And for that, we have been working, has been a while with a lot of tools for project evaluation. And as one of the main leaders, experts in BRT planning, we recognize that there is a need for a more advanced tool to estimate the potential impacts of BRT corridors planning and implementation. An example of that is actually the TEMP tool, the Transport Emissions Evaluation Model for Projects, that was developed in 2012. TEMP was actually designated to evaluate the environmental impacts of transport projects, and building on the TEMP methodology. Now the BRT SCOPE tool that we are launching today is actually an updated version of it, with several improvements and differentiations, making even a more effective way of accessing and planning BRT corridors. So the BRT SCOPE tool brings a lot of different approaches. So we, for the methodology, we use new default travel and emissions data from Compact City Scenario Electrified. That's a publication of us that is super interesting, that compares really how we need to make a different approach of our way of planning and understanding our cities. I believe that we are going to share that the link in the chat as well. The BRT scope to also improve the predictions of BRT ridership based on past project data. I think Madeline are going to talk about that later. And also BRT scope 2, different from TEMP, it also includes non-tailpipe emissions. So what is actually the scope 2? So the simple calculator of project effects. So sorry, guys, I'm with a cold, so it's a free tool that can estimate potential impacts of BRT corridor implementation. So we can add a lot of inputs from cities' basic information, fleet characteristics, population and ridership, and it will make us have a couple of final results. But we can also, and it's an optional thing, but we can also add custom factors too, in order for it to be a little bit more realistic. And with that, we can have a lot of really interesting results. We can understand the changes in ridership, the percentage shifts from other modes, the potential impacts on air quality pollutants, and also in climate pollutants. And also we do a equivalency of climate pollutants results in order for us to compare how it would, for instance, how it would be different if we are taking cars off the streets, and how does that compare to that. And So what is the importance of that, especially for BRTs? With good planning, we can make better systems. So BRT Scope 2 simplifies the assessments to support projects, reducing potential times and costs that we might have. It can enhance further selections by facilitating the selection process for planned corridors. It can also provide pollutant emissions for various routes, adding in environmental and also health informed decisions. It can provide also insightful impact analysis, evaluate potential impacts of design changes, for instance, assess fleet technology change to support sustainable choices. And also it's a good way to make the case for a BRT. So with data-driven promotion, it supplies key information, key data that can make a stronger case for BRT. So that's a good way to go to. And for us to guarantee that we want to make better systems, it's good for us to plan, operate, monitor, and evaluate correctly. And for us in ITSP, we do recommend you to take a look on our main publications related to BRT systems, like the BRT Standard, recently launched new version actually, and the BRT planning guides. Now, before I pass along actually to Maddie, we would like to hear from you. So through the webinar, it's going to be available a questionnaire for you guys. We want to hear how can the BRT Scope 2 benefit your work and or your city. So please add your inputs to that. The questionnaire will be available throughout the webinar. So thank you so much. And now I'll pass along to Maddie, who will share a little bit more information on how to use the BRT Scope 2 properly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beatriz. So my name is Madeline Lieberman, and I led the development of the BRT Scope tool. So I'll be talking about how the BRT Scope tool works. How do we actually get to these predictions of emissions impact? So the Scope tool uses three main steps to calculate estimates of emissions avoided. So these are first, predicting future ridership on a BRT corridor. Second, predicting the riders who shift from other modes to the BRT. And finally, calculating the emissions avoided by the users who shift to BRT from those modes. So the first step is to predict the ridership of the future corridor. And so for a lot of transport emissions models, you have to enter a number of riders per day or a number of kilometers traveled per day. And while the BRT Scope tool does allow for this, we also have ways of predicting future ridership from easily available data. So to do this, we've collected data from 21 BRT corridors around the world. So we looked at corridor level indicators. And this was all the data that was available for corridors that have been thoroughly evaluated. So if you're aware of more data, we would love to hear from you and to incorporate it to make the tool better. But in terms of the data that we collected, we gathered ridership data and also information on service characteristics of BRT. And some of those data sources were brtdata.org, deep, thorough impact evaluations, and transit agency websites. We also calculated some new variables based on geography and population near the BRT corridors. And finally, we examined the correlation of these variables to figure out which ones were the most important for predicting ridership of the BRT. So the Scope tool provides two options for predicting BRT ridership. The first for users who do not know the current ridership, and the second for users who do know the current ridership of the corridor where the BRT will be implemented. And in both of these scenarios, the tool predicts the future ridership on the corridor. So the first model for predicting BRT ridership is, again, for users who don't have data on the current or future ridership. So this model allows you to enter population density information and the length of the corridor, and then the model does a calculation of the people near the BRT system. Additionally, it asks for data about the frequency of the corridor. So that's how the number of buses that are coming in a certain period of time. And then these two variables are used to predict the average weekday ridership on the corridor. And I provided some of the regression statistics on the right. I won't be going through all of these, but you can see importantly that the adjusted R squared, which is a measure of how well the model fits the data, is very high. So it's a good fit of the data. And so basically this model shows that the higher the number of people near the infrastructure, the higher the future ridership of the BRT. And additionally, the higher the frequency of the future BRT, the higher the ridership. So the next model is designed for users who actually have data on the current corridor. And then again, it is used to predict the future corridor ridership. So for this model, the two input variables are the average weekday local bus ridership before the BRT and the BRT standard score. So the BRT standard is ITDP's mechanism for rating BRTs, for evaluating the quality of BRTs. And so it provides kind of a shorthand for assessing the future quality of the BRT. So the higher the corridor ridership before the BRT, the higher the change in average weekday corridor ridership. So the higher the ridership of the future BRT compared to the previous corridor. And similarly, the higher the BRT score, the higher the future, the higher the quality of the future BRT, the more riders will be attracted. So both of these models have a variable that represents sort of the baseline population of the future BRT and another variable representing the service characteristics, because both of these contribute to higher ridership. And so this option 2 model was found to be a bit more precise due to having more of that actual data on the corridor. So it's recommended over option 1 if possible. So the next step is to predict the number of these riders who have shifted from other modes. So when we talk about modal shift, this kind of data comes from intercept surveys where surveyors ask, if you weren't taking the BRT, what mode would you take? So this is a really powerful source of data to understand what modes riders would have used if the BRT was not available. And so we collected modal shift data from 11 BRTs around the world. Again, this was all the data that we could find on BRT modal shift. So again, if you have more, please do share it with us. We would love to incorporate it into the tool. And we compared this to the split of the modes in those cities. So the percentage of users who employ each mode to make their trips. So we compared this modal share, the percentage of people using each of these modes, to that modal shift. And we found that the higher the share of the users of each mode, the higher the number of people who will shift from that mode, which is more or less intuitive. And so we used a ratio where we compared the modal shift and the modal share. And so by entering the modal share or the modal split of the city into the model, we have a factor that allows us to predict the future modal shift. So finally, we have to calculate the emissions avoided from those modes that were shifted from. And so the model uses a comprehensive way of accounting for different emissions avoided and also emissions produced by the new BRT. So first, we have greenhouse gas emissions on the left side. So first, we account for the tailpipe greenhouse gas emissions emitted by internal combustion vehicles, so those gas diesel vehicles. And in addition to the tailpipe emissions, we also include emissions from manufacture of different vehicles and from the infrastructure that is needed for those vehicles. So it's a very thorough accounting of the different greenhouse gas emissions produced by those fleets. And then on the right-hand side, we have the air pollutant emissions. So tailpipe air pollutant emissions, again, from internal combustion vehicles. And then additionally, we've included non-tailpipe emissions. So emissions from the brake, tire, and road abrasion that these vehicles produce just by their contact with the road. And so this is an important contribution of the new BRT SCOPE tool, and it's an emerging area of research that we've been really excited to incorporate to get a better understanding of the future air pollution impacts of BRT. So all of these emissions factors are multiplied by the travel avoided from modes shifting to BRT that I previously mentioned. And in addition, we've added in the emissions produced, again, by the future BRT. So the difference there, the total, is the total greenhouse gas emissions and the total air pollutant emissions avoided by these changes in activity when the BRT is added. So we're really excited to have a lot of future directions of the tool. We are going to be working on a web tool to improve the user base and to make it more accessible for a wider variety of users, even though some may not be familiar with Excel. We're also looking forward to calculating additional benefits, like health and economic benefits that are really important factors in addition to air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. And finally, we're excited to add additional modules of the tool, such as for the impacts of adding walking infrastructure or the impacts of parking policies. So stay tuned. You can sign up for ITDP's email list to get the latest scope updates when they're available. And next, I'm happy to pass it off to, next I'll be talking about how we've used the scope tool actually in practice. So this big table is collected from data on corridors that are being planned in the different cities that ITDP works in. So some of the cities that are represented here: Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, Merida in Mexico, and Jakarta in Indonesia. And there's a variety of different corridors here. And as you can see, there's a variety of emissions impacts. But I want to talk in particular about two corridors. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I want to compare the Trans-Brazil corridor in Rio and the IE tram L6 in Merida. So these are two different corridors, two different cities and contexts, and they both have really impressive emissions impacts. But some of the key differences here in that led to different predictions in the tool. For the Trans-Brazil corridor, you can see that it's about 28 kilometers long compared to the IE tram L6 corridor, which is closer to 15 kilometers. Additionally, the Trans-Brazil corridor has a very, very high frequency, and it also has a higher population density near the stations, and that's in people per kilometer squared. So you can see that the predicted ridership of the Trans-Brazil corridor is expected to be much higher, and it's expected to have a larger GHG emissions impact. So this value is the prevented greenhouse gas emissions in the year 2030. And additionally, we have the prevented PM 2.5 emissions in the year 2030. So of course, these are different cities, and what makes sense in one city and the emissions prevented in one city will be different based on context. But we can also see that there are opportunities here for creating longer corridors and corridors that have high population density to reach the most people. We can also see that there's opportunities for EV buses. For example, if the Trans-Brazil corridor employed electric buses, then it could have an even higher emissions impact. And so in conclusion, we really hope to get the SCOPE tool working on these planned corridors and to understand all your different uses of the tool. So feel free to send those to us, and we look forward to seeing them. So thank you so much, and I'm really excited to pass it over to Winnie to get the perspective of the World Bank on how the SCOPE tool can be used to increase investment in BRT.
Thank you, Maddie. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Winnie Wang from the World Bank. Thanks for the presentation, Maddie. Everybody you signed up here, we all know BRT investments, serve as one of the great mitigation measures for climate change. It helps to limit the impacts of climate change by preventing or reducing the emission of GHG gases. However, as we all know, and I think there are some colleagues from working for the government side, with limited public funding resources, it's getting difficult to justify the investment for BRT among many, urgent priorities of government, especially in developing countries. And then it takes a lot for us practitioners to demonstrate the broad social and economic benefits and specific financial returns for such investment. And meanwhile, we have more and more climate finance resources and instruments available nowadays, which also require us to quantitatively calculate the specific climate benefits from investment in order to obtain these funding opportunities. But we all know it's not easy to comprehensively and systematically capture the broad climate co-benefits from BRT investments, as Maddie mentioned, mainly due to lack of data and also a lack of standard methodology globally. Well, I haven't used the tool, but I think a dedicated tool such like SCOPE, if it's validated by practitioners, could offer a great value to address this technical gap and help urban planners to convince the decision makers and also attract more funding opportunities. I would like to also mention one recent example supported by the World Bank Group that is in Dakar, Senegal, where we supported the first all-electric BRT system on the African continent. The project also further contributed to the decarbonization for urban passenger transport sector. We expect 1.2 million ton reduction in GHG emissions over a 30 project cycle, roughly the equivalent of getting 260,000 cars off the road. That's really, impressive. Again, as I say, if we can, every project to quantify these great benefits, I think it helps us to make the case for such investment to politicians or decision makers in countries. Also, this project takes the GHG emission reduction to a few steps further. For example, Dakar will also build its first ever bike lanes along the BRT routes, which also offer significant climate friendly landscaping improvements, such as trees and ground covering plants. We all know globally, the experience have demonstrated that active mobility, especially walking and cycling investments, complement BRT investments, especially to increase the catchment area and the access for BRT stations. I would like to also mention that together with ITDP, the World Bank Group led by me and my colleagues, we are also developing a cost-benefit analysis tool for active mobility, focusing on cycling infrastructure to understand the cost-benefit ratio for cycling infrastructure investment, including climate benefits, to also make the case for cycling investment, especially along the public transport investment corridors. These two kind of investments go hand in hand to improve the attractiveness of both and attract more choice riders from cars to more environment friendly transport modes. So this is my takeaway from the tool. Yeah, I will stop here. Over to you, Ivana.
Great, thank you so much. Of course, we'll get into more intricate questions in the Q&A. And I really apologize for the Mentimeter. I think when we were testing it, we might have actually closed the voting. So there was a new link in the chat. Feel free to still fill it out. And I'll wait a second till the results are visible, but let me display it to you. So the question was, that's right here. How could the BRT SCOPE tool benefit your work? And we know there are different sectors here present in the audience. So that also depends on the work that you are doing or what you are interested in specifically about BRT planning. And the options were supporting BRT planning decisions, understanding BRT design improvements, identifying BRT fleet technology enhancements, supporting the case for BRT, and leveraging investments in BRT projects. So it's fun to see those numbers changing here, but without a surprise, we can tell that the tool definitely can help the case, making the case for BRT. So as we are pitching ideas to whether financing institutions or governments, this tool can be actually very powerful with decision-making and even just broadly speaking, advocating for BRT implementation. The second place, I think, again, it's linked to that. It's supporting BRT planning decisions. So deciding about the siting of the corridor, whether the corridor should go into specific areas to have a greater impact. So I will leave the voting open, but you can tell actually the answers are pretty well spread out. But yes, supporting for BRT and making the case for BRT is quite a powerful way to use the tool. So with that, let us get into the Q&A portion. Feel free to add your questions in the Q&A box at any point, but I have just a couple of questions to start us off from me. So you saw from the answers here different ways of using the SCOPE tool, and we hope that you will try it out also, whether you just play around with it or really use it in your work. We hope everyone will be able to try it. But leading from that, my question would be, how is data output from the SCOPE tool important and how this can be beneficial for cities? And that question will be for all of you here in the panel. It will be just nice to reiterate these questions after you present it. So I don't know who would like to start first.
I'm happy to start. So an important impact of the SCOPE tool is that it's free. And so this data is available without the need for cities to pay money for consultants to do more complex assessments. Of course, this is a simple calculator. It's a high-level calculator, so it doesn't replace those more complex assessments, but it is a really important tool at an earlier phase of planning so that BRT planners, anyone interested in BRT can take these results and really show the potential for BRT. Additionally, I think that the modal shift and the ridership impact predictions on their own can be really important, and the SCOPE tool results also provide those as intermediate steps to the GHG emission calculations. And those intermediate steps can really help to predict a larger variety of impacts, which can be entered into other calculators, or in the future, we will hopefully be adding those additional impacts into the SCOPE tool.
Thanks so much, Madeline.
Yeah,
It'll be
adding
interesting.
to... No, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead, Baptiste.
No, I was just going to say that adding to Madeline's comments, BRT systems do offer like a very powerful solution to deliver rapid, reliable, and high quality public transport. And I think that we can see that there is a recognition of the need for a more efficient and sustainable urban transport in the cities nowadays. So I do feel that expanding the planning and evaluation of BRT projects with data-driven insights is the best way to go. And as Maddie have mentioned, SCOPE 2 does offer a good, simple way of us to understand and estimate, make simple estimations to plan and implement corridors that will have a greater impact in reducing emissions, enhancing public health, and enhancing also user experience.
Yeah, I would like to add also, I really like the name of the tool, scoping. I think its biggest value actually is about scoping and help to prioritize among different alternative corridors. Because as we know, as Maddie mentioned, this tool is not supposed to be replacing the full-scale feasibility study, which we need to eventually, if we invest on a BRT corridor, we need to get more data, have a better understanding. But this tool gives us a very powerful initial option to select which corridors have biggest potential to support reducing the GHG emissions. And after that, the teams can further invest on the specific corridors, get the data needed. But that initial step is very helpful and is cost effective and it's quick. Yeah, I'll stop here.
Thank you for this answer. And it's really great to hear the alignment between obviously the financing institution and advocates. So it's really great actually we're talking about it together in this group. So just following from that, again, this is like to reiterate what you were presenting, but my follow-up question would be with all the steady increase of BRTs around the world, this tool obviously in the comparison is very promising. And as it helps to plan better BRTs, to move people more efficiently. So what does this mean for the tool itself and the potential impacts, let's say, 10 years down the road? So how do you envision its impact and its influence in 10 years down the road? I understand it's a very aspirational question, so I think like there's no limit to the answer. Someone wants to go first?
I can go first. So I do think that SCOPE 2 is a methodology that is going to be even better, as Maddie have mentioned during her presentation. We are hoping to gather a little bit more insights towards the economical impacts to that too. And with those additional things, I think SCOPE 2 is going to be a very valuable tool for us to use in order for us to implement BRT corridors moving forward, and making sure that we can offer a way to advocate even better for BRT systems. So my hope is that influence in 10 years, it's going to be that we are going to have more BRT corridors that are funded, that are really financed in a way that we can expand our BRT network and have greater user experience and a really reliable system.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Beth.
going off of that, I would say that so first of all, the tools, again, the accessibility of the tool, I think is really important. And I am also hoping that this can expand, so many cities around the world can start thinking about BRT. And if they are hoping to implement BRT, that they have an additional tool in their toolbox that can make that push towards actually getting it built. And we also talked to a lot of development banks and transport experts around the world while we were preparing the tool, and learned that there's, as Winnie was saying, there's this need for something in the early stages of project planning, especially in places where there's not much data available. And so again, so I think that within 10 years, I hope that the SCOPE tool can sort of fill that gap in creating the BRT systems and planning them.
Agreed.
Yeah, thank you. If I may come in, I think in 10 years, probably the tool will get more automatic and fancier, but I think having a SCOPE tool now, 10 years before, 10 years later, it has a great impact on the awareness building, right? Usually, I mean, I'm going back to the narrative on justifying the investment for BRT. Traditionally, the economic assessment talk about travel time reduction, we call operation cost reduction, and also some external benefits such like accidents or safety improvement due to newer fleet or improved fleets. We also talking about the GHG, but if we put more emphasis on that, I think it helps to build awareness to understand these additional big benefits. I think we probably a little bit conservative now on estimating that, but I think just have a dedicated tool or talk about it. It helps to bring the community to understand, the importance of climate change, and also how the community can do support sustainable transport and contribute to that effort. I think the tool plays a good role on that. It seems as our active mobility tool, it's really to bring the awareness to the broader community. I'm sure in 10 years, our methodology, our tool will improve a lot, and probably, it can be more effective and capture more data. Yeah.
Agreed. It will be indeed interesting to also see how the tool plays out in the collaboration between the different sectors. So the cities, the decision makers, the financing institutions, and technicians, right? Like different people would have to use it, advocate with it, get the data. So just following on that, maybe with Maddie about ways of or like possibilities of improving the tool. So what are some avenues, again, you mentioned that the tool can be improved, and also combining that with the question from Andre, if you actually had the opportunity to compare the SCOPE to other types of evaluation, so comparing that with other methodologies that could potentially be supplemental to or make this tool better even, or work together with that tool.
Yeah, so I'll start with how we'd like to improve the tool. And so, as I've been emphasizing throughout my presentation, the way to improve this current methodology is through more data. So if you're aware of more impact evaluations, the back-end data of the tool is all available in tabs in the model when you download it. So when you download the model, you have access to all of the data. And I also think that's really powerful because cities can, planners can take that data and use it for their own purposes. But it's also important because if you are aware of additional data, that can only improve the tool. And it also speaks to the need to monitor and evaluate existing BRT corridors to actually get that data. So I think there's a real need to actually know what the impacts of these systems are to get better data. And so even after the corridor is implemented, the story doesn't end there. And then I think that Winnie's point additionally about including the impacts of complementary NMT, like bicycle and walking infrastructure, and how different intermodal connections can improve the BRT ridership, I think, and the greenhouse gas impacts. I think those are all really important factors. In terms of the second part, as far as comparing this methodology and the predictions to other methodologies, we have done testing where we've compared it to other similar kind of GHG assessments. And yeah, for more kinds of that evaluation and testing, I think that's another great future direction of the tool.
Great, thank you. So let me jump between some questions here. Again, question for you all about the maybe challenge of using the tool. So what are the challenges for equally development banks and advocates like ITDP to convince cities to use the tool to improve the BRT or even implement BRT? So I know it's like an overarching question, but it will be interesting to hear that from you.
Yeah, Ivana, I'm happy to jump in first. I think one of the biggest challenges is data availability Maddie mentioned, and also the validation of the result, right? I like the tool. It designed two kinds of users. For some of the cities, they may have more data, and then the tool let them to directly input parameters, their values, which is probably a much better option. Secondly, we also don't want to scare away cities that don't have much data, but would like to have a good understanding, initial understanding I'm talking about, not a fully fledged feasibility study. But if they want to have a good understanding, the potential of such investment, I think it's good to also provide some kind of regional average or some representation of similar city that, these cities, if they don't have data, they can follow such reference value data and do an estimation with the understanding that the result will not be, very accurate, but give them a rough idea on how that can give them an idea and also argue for the case for potential investment. And I think that also relates to the tool improvement value. As you move on, it will be very helpful, right, to do some validation against real world case studies and have more like analysis of the confidence level if certain cities with little or no data want to use the tool. So they feel confident if they use the result to go to decision makers, they know it's mostly confident with the range, although it's not accurate. And I think that's very important to give them that kind of confidence for such estimation. Yeah, that's my major concern on the data side.
Thank you, Winnie. And from the perspective of advocates for Madeline or Beatrice, what could be any challenges of convincing cities to use the tool that you may think of?
Yeah, actually adding to what Winnie has said about the lack of data that most cities suffer from, I think that's a great way actually to convince and understand the potential of this tool, because many cities do face a lot of financial constraints or even like lack of technical expertise to really understand how we can address or how we can talk about environmental issues, or even how we can really understand the potential impacts on the daily basis of the pollutants that are being emitted to our cities. So I think that for organizations like ITDP or others, addressing those challenges, like addressing those lack of data, lack of expertise, lack of financial requirements, I think that require really demonstrate the clear benefits and cost-effective or BRT systems of pathways and cycling lanes, and that is providing technical support and engaging in continued advocacy to highlight the long-term advantages. And the BRT SCOPE tool does gives that, and we hope that we can make a great tool also for pathways and cycling lanes and parking as well.
Thank you so much for that. So let me just maybe follow up with Winnie. You were talking about financing projects and how you're excited about the use of the tool. Maybe can you think of like a scenario where this tool like really could help make like kind of like overcome barriers to financing? There's actually a question here that I wanted to link this with from MA. It asks for, from the bank perspective, what are the main drivers or barriers to financing BRT? And therefore, I was wondering if you can think about a scenario where maybe those barriers can be overcome with the use of the tool.
Thank you, Ivana. I was actually looking at the Q&A box. We got a lot of questions. This is a good question. I won't say there are barriers for us to finance BRT. In the World Bank Group, we're very keen. We have financed a lot globally BRT project. You know, our goal is to really support communities to switch more to environment friendly and also sustainable transport mode. And BRT serves one of these best options, right, as cost-effective investments. For us, some of the challenges ahead is, one is actually awareness from the client side. As you guys, many of you know, our financing, it takes a tool. First of all, World Bank is willing to finance, but most importantly, the client countries, the cities are keen to invest on this area, prioritize, and then request from us. So I think building awareness that BRT is a viable option for financially, economically, and socially a viable option investment, infrastructure investment, that's important. That awareness is super important to get client cities to come to us to look for that, because we have a lot of experience on that. Some of the challenges for us is, as you guys mentioned, one is the data availability. We do spend a lot of time, right, to help the clients to do the feasibility study, understand the full picture of the returns, economic rate of return, financial returns of such investment, because that's important. Number two is also how we design the system to make it really sustainable in the long term. As you guys know, there will be not only just design the BRT, but the construction cost, and lately the operations cost, maintenance cost, and how the revenue can cover some part of that. How to attract more riders to the system to ensure it's not just we build a system, but also it's used to its full potential. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, to make sure we attract more people to the BRT system, to show its usability to the decision makers, that is a good use. I think with that, what we're doing together now on active mobility as a complementary measure, and also this tool, of course, if it's validated by different practitioners, I think serve a great purpose to, number one, improve the awareness, number two, to really quantitatively capture the broad benefits that we teams can use, and NGOs and different passionate people can use to go to decision makers to say, these are the numbers, not just we think it's good, but the numbers are saying for that. I think it helps, and these will help address these challenges ahead.
Thank you so much, Winnie. I like how you made the point that the biggest step is to attract the most users, right, to get the return on investment. So I think that's how we should be thinking about the role of a BRT, right, to serving the most people as possible. So I just wanted to close maybe with one more technical question, again, linking with the biggest impact. Question is from Madeline, linking to the methodology you were speaking about. What are the biggest factors in greenhouse gas reductions from BRT? And as you were mentioning, mentioning few elements of the methodology. Can you just sum that up for us?
Yeah, so what we found are the most important predictors of the impact are those ridership characteristics that help to really improve the future BRT ridership. And so you get a higher total number of people shifting from polluting modes like private cars. So in our two models, we have a variable that sort of captures the population around the BRT and that kind of baseline population that's served. And then we also have a variable related to the service and the quality of the BRT. And so each of those can improve the impact, but really the baseline population, I would say, is fundamental. So building BRTs in more dense areas and that reach a larger number of people.
Thank you so much. So I just wanted to congratulate my team here at ITDP for this BRT SCOPE 2 launch today. It's really great to hear from you. I think the ideas from the audience are really great about maybe doing some sort of demo or training. We're actually thinking about doing some of those types of presentations to stakeholders. So reach out to us. And we'll make sure to incorporate that into our thinking and planning for dissemination. But rest assured, there will be more webinars related to BRT planning. It's part of our Year of the Bus campaign, and really promoting BRT and buses more broadly this year, as well as best practices. So again, I just really wanted to thank you, Beatriz and Madeline, and of course, Winnie, for being today. It's really great to hear different sectors discussing together. And then lastly, we're at the time, but I dropped a link in the chat for our upcoming webinar next week titled Cycling for All, in which we'll make a case about the universal role of cycling, right? Both are important. We need the first and last mile connectivity and public transport. So do join us next week. We'll hear from different users, from groups representing gender, disability community, and partner organizations, as well as city leaders. So that should be great. Again, thank you so much for this webinar and stay tuned for more. Take care, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.